So this is an MS Conversations Now program. It's MS Patients Voices, and this is funded by MS Views and News. It's our own program. We don't ask for any sponsorship to do this. We actually started doing this at the early days of the pandemic. And my name is Stuart Schlossman. You just saw a slide go by about that. I'm the president and founder of MS Views and News. And tonight's program, as you can see, that I will be having a general little conversation with Lisa, and we're going to get to know about Lisa, and we're going to get to know about what she's doing these days. So, Lisa, first, why don't we open this up nice and easy? Why don't you tell us about yourself?
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Stuart. It's really an honor to be here. I am a family doctor and an MS warrior. I was diagnosed in 2009. I'm also a mom of 2 girls. I'm married to a pediatric hospital doctor, and we live in Austin, Texas. I'm actually a native Austinite. I've been here my whole life, except for my medical training. I went away for a bit. But I've been back in Austin for over 20 years now. And I am really passionate about improving healthcare for people who don't have great resources, for vulnerable populations, and helping people with chronic disease, including MS, to live their best lives. I recently published a book called Up the Down Escalator. That's we'll talk about a little bit more, but that's something I'm excited to share with you.
Great, thank you. Hey, you're an Austinite, you said. Where's your accent? I mean, where's that drawl? I mean, where's the cowboy hat? Where's any of that?
I can bring it on when I need to, but I usually talk without much of an accent. I think it got kind of, I was embarrassed to even say y'all when I went up to college at Amherst in Massachusetts. And so I have, it's kind of gone unless I'm talking to someone else with a strong accent.
Sure.
And I say y'all all the time, by the way.
You say y'all? Yeah. I say that too. I say it all the time.
Good.
All right.
Good.
So
yeah, it's a great word.
You told us about your family. That's great. Tell us about your hobbies, and tell us how you're able to do all that you're doing these days. I mean, I know that some of your hobbies, you're doing some mountain climbing. I saw that on Twitter over the summer. Oops, I got to say X. All right, I saw that over the summer on X, and I saw that you're doing some big bike rides or little bike rides, and that you're working out some. So tell us about these. Tell us how you're able to do it, especially living in the heat of Austin.
Yes, I am a fitness enthusiast. I love to run. I run down at the lake. We have a beautiful lake that runs through downtown Austin, and I'm usually there a couple times a week at least. Also, I love to bike, and I bike the MS 150 to raise funds and awareness for the National MS Society. That's usually every spring, but I love just being outside. Of course, right now I don't love being outside because it's over 100 degrees nearly every day here. And that's tricky. So I swim, usually indoors actually, but I really do like to exercise. I'm also, of course, love to write. I write a column for a news outlet called Public Health Watch, in addition to writing a blog for the National MS Society's Momentum magazine. And I just finished this memoir. And I love to travel and to garden and to spend time with my friends and family.
Sounds great. Hey, I'm not going to feel bad for you that you had days of over 100 degrees, because I think we had 2 months of over 100 degrees here in South Florida. So, between the heat humidity index and just in general, it's just crappy weather here. By the way, everybody, if my internet looks slow, it's because we have foul weather out there, right? And although I'm not on the side of the state that's really bad, it evidently is starting to take effect on the internet. So I'm sorry for that, and just listen rather than trying to catch up with where my mouth and my sound are at, okay? All right, next, so let's talk about your memoir now. So tell us a little bit about Up the Down Escalator and about your experiences with this.
Thanks. Yeah. So my book is about my transformation from doctor to patient with MS while I was running a clinic for people who were underserved and uninsured near downtown Austin. Before my diagnosis, I was already overwhelmed taking care of my patients. I had patients struggling with just incredible needs. I had a patient with bats in her apartment. I had another guy who couldn't afford his anxiety medicine for $4 at Walmart. trying to help these patients really just took a lot out of me. And I was also raising two little kids at the time of my diagnosis. My girls were 2 and 4 years old. I didn't expect to get sick myself, especially not with something like MS. But this book is about that journey and coming to terms with my illness, about all of the insights I gained on the front lines of a really messy and dysfunctional healthcare system, especially once I became a patient.
Okay, thank you for that. Why did you want to write the book?
Well, it's a good question. I ask myself that a lot because it took a very long time, over a decade, for me to finish the book and get it published. Getting it published was very challenging, but I ended up with a great publishing company, and I'm very excited now that it's out in the world. But, my diagnosis was such a shock. I had those 2 kids under 5. I had a really challenging job. I was a health nut, and I thought, oh, I'm never going to get sick. I'm going to live to be 100. I know all the things to do to stay healthy. But as all of you know, MS hits the best of us, and it's just a lot of bad luck. We don't really understand why MS starts and, even why it progresses in many cases. And a lot of it is out of our control. This was a very tough thing for me to deal with. And so, writing the book was a self-indulgent exercise in a lot of ways. It was just a way for me to really process what had happened. I started writing in a journal when I was 11 years old, and I've written every day since. I just turned 50, so that's a lot of days. I think I've missed 5 or 6 ever. So it's always been kind of a therapeutic thing for me to write about what I'm going through. And in this case, I wanted to just tear apart that experience and put the pieces back together about my diagnosis and living with MS. And then the other part of my decision to write this book was because I wanted to help my patients and help others who were dealing with a tough medical diagnosis and the people that care for them. I wanted them to have some validation and some ideas about how to kind of think about their experience. And then I wanted my patients I wanted to kind of shine a light on their experience and on the health disparities and really challenge our leaders to come up with some better strategies to improve access to care.
Okay, thank you for that. So for many people with MS or other health conditions, it can be hard for them to open up and share their diagnosis with others. And you seem to have no problem with it. So why don't you tell us how you chose or how you found to navigate your own journey with MS and how you were able to speak with others?
Right. I'm definitely not a secretive person. I mean, I wrote a memoir, so you kind of know that about me from the beginning. But I started telling people right away. It was really helpful for me to share my story, and it felt like I was able to share the burden that way. But
Right.
I am very well aware that that is not an option for a lot of people. Diseases like MS still carry a little bit of a stigma, unfortunately. In fact, that's another reason I wrote the book, was to try to reduce that stigma and make it more, okay to be out there and to be vulnerable when you have something like this happen. But MS can impact people's careers and their friendships and their family. I was really, really fortunate to get support from friends and coworkers. And I think I took a little bit of a risk in sharing it because I didn't necessarily know how they would react, but I think they really stepped up. When I've changed jobs or when I've met new people, I've had to think a little bit more about when and how to reveal my diagnosis, or if it even makes sense. And sometimes I've delayed doing that longer than I probably would have originally. It really depends on the situation. But in almost every instance, I've received a good response, the response I wanted, a supportive response. And I've been glad I told people. I think that, again, that's not an option for everyone, but I do encourage anybody with a tough diagnosis, going through a hard time with anything, to at least share it with someone. I think that it's important to have someone you can turn to who can help, again, share that burden.
So, thank you for that. So when you do you show symptoms? Are you ever symptomatic? And if so, what was how did you feel during that time? What were your darkest moments? Did you want to hide in a cave? Tell us about it.
Yes, in fact, I think I may have written something about hiding in a cave in my memoir, because I definitely have felt like that at times, right?
Right.
And I still have symptoms. I don't want to pretend like everything's gone and I'm cured of MS. I am definitely not, and I have symptoms regularly. My main symptoms continues to be and has always been dizziness, and it's random. And there are some things I've learned that can help make it better or worse, although it took me a very long time to figure that out. More about that in the memoir. But no, I've had a lot of dark moments. I think the two that really stand out, one is the time leading up to my diagnosis when I did not know what was wrong.
Sure.
And I imagine a lot of people out there can relate to that, right? I thought I had a brain tumor. I didn't understand why I was having all these weird symptoms. I was having dizziness, of course, but I also had double vision. I had some taste changes. I was trying to figure out where in my brain the tumor was. And that was terrifying, especially again, because I had a 2 and 4 year old at home. And then I think the second most difficult time for me was actually after my spinal tap. So I had already received a probable diagnosis with MS after the MRI, but the spinal tap was done to confirm my diagnosis. And I got really sick afterwards. I'm not even sure, looking back, that it was the spinal tap that caused me to get sick, but I got very sick, was incapacitated, in bed for several days, and thinking, this is what my MS is going to be like. I didn't know if I would ever be able to do anything again. And that was very, very tough getting through it.
Thank you for that. Now, let me talk about the spinal tap first. I had a similar experience after I was first thought to have MS, and they wanted me to go for a spinal tap. The hospital did it wrong. The doctor didn't leave the correct orders with them. They did not have me laying flat. They had me almost sitting up afterwards. They had me out of there after 30 minutes rather than the hour or change that they were supposed to keep me. And I literally had to crawl from when I was brought back to my home to get from out of the car in the driveway to the front door. I couldn't see anything. And yeah, I was stuck in bed for weeks afterwards because I actually had a spinal leak from the tap.
Oh my gosh.
And
yeah.
the doctor didn't want to give me a blood patch.
Oh gosh. Okay, so that makes my experience my experience pales in comparison to that. Actually, I am so sorry you had to go through that. That sounds horrible.
It was terrible, but so when you were just bringing all that up, I said, wow, I remember that. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. I'll have a nice dream tonight.
Oh gosh. Well,
Right.
I haven't heard of a lot of people having such a bad experience after the spinal tap. So hopefully these are not everyone is experiencing similar,
exactly. That was a very long time
bad
ago
outcomes.
also. Yeah, that was a very long time ago, and I've definitely gotten better since then. But then, of course, age took over too.
Sure.
Right. How long was it from when you first started getting symptoms to when you were actually diagnosed?
I was diagnosed in 9 days, if you can believe that. It was really amazing.
Wow.
And honest, and I mean, I think if you count to the very beginning, it was maybe a month and a half because I had some visual changes a little bit about 3 weeks before the other symptoms started. And I never put it together until months later that was probably connected. But really, from the beginning of the dizziness until the MRI, that was 9 days. And that was because of being a physician and having amazing contacts, getting in with a neurologist, an ENT doctor, ear, nose, and throat, and then an MRI all in that week.
Wow, that's great. It's good that you found out that quick. Because most of us have, obviously, as you being a doctor also, that that it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't. And for many of my patients, they would have never gotten anything like that.
That's correct. Oh, maybe you got the special treatment because you were a doctor.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I was able to call people that I knew and talk to them on their cell phones and go and see them on their lunch hour.
Sure.
It was very, very lucky. And I am well aware that the world doesn't work that way. And I did get special treatment. I really want everyone to have that level of access. And it's tragic to me to think about what my patients went through and what I'm sure many of you went through getting diagnosed.
All right. So going forward, how has your relationship with your been since you were diagnosed?
I think that MS granted me a new level of empathy and understanding with patients. I like to think that I was always empathic with my patients and really care about my patients. And I think that's fair to say. But I now know what it is like to have scary symptoms and to undergo a diagnostic workup, to have to wait for results, to have your medicines not get delivered, to have to deal with insurance companies. I mean, MS really taught me a lot of lessons about what that feels like. And I think that as a result, I'm a little bit more gentle and compassionate with people, and understanding also when I'm sharing some difficult news with them. I don't share my own story with patients usually, but I think I just have felt a little bit of a deeper connection with some of them.
Okay, thank you for that. Next, I'm going to ask you, what are the key lessons learned since you first got, I'm not going to say sick with MS, but how you, when you first felt your MS, when you first got diagnosed, and what has surprised you most?
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of lessons. I'll give you three things that I think are good lessons I've learned. One is self-advocacy. That is just so critically important. So, I was an advocate for myself getting diagnosed. I was like, I saw a neurologist. She said I probably had atypical migraines and sent me on my way. And I continued to have symptoms that were getting weirder and more scary over the next few days. And I called an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and he understood that I was concerned and got me into his office and got that MRI. But, that advocacy for myself is what led to my early diagnosis. It's also something that I have continued to prioritize, whether it's fighting with an insurance company over an unfair bill, which I have certainly had, or having to call over and over again to get test results from a doctor. It's just so important to stand up for yourself, because really no one else is going to do that. And if you can't, get a family member, get someone that's close to you to help you with making some of those difficult calls, because that can be exhausting and demoralizing. So that's number one, self-advocacy. I think that number two is prioritize self-care. So for me, one chronic disease is more than enough. I do not want to get any other chronic conditions. And obviously, there's a lot of that that's out of my control, but there's a lot that's in my control. And so I exercise every day. I eat a very healthy diet with lots of fruits and vegetables. I really make sure that I get enough sleep as best I can. I do what I can to reduce stress. I've adopted a mindfulness meditation practice, and I avoid unhealthy substances. So those are just critically important to keep me from getting something else. And then the third really important lesson that I've learned is to know your purpose. Have a goal that you're working for. Always have something that's going to get you out of bed in the morning. Be exciting. Be something that learn that you can feel a sense of accomplishment about. So for me, like training for the MS 150 has been a great goal ever since I started doing that back in 2018. And that's a bike ride that's over 160 miles actually in Central Texas over a 2-day weekend. And then I've developed writing goals and work goals. Certainly getting my memoir published is a real triumph for me, and a good one that's helped me since I got sick with MS.
Thank you. So Tom writes, you said you suspected a brain tumor from your symptoms before diagnosis. Did you ever suspect it could possibly be MS?
Great question. And I'm embarrassed to say I did not suspect it. My husband did not suspect it. I don't even think the neurologist I saw the first time suspected it. But looking back, I think, gosh, how did I not think of this? Like, it seems so obvious. I really wish I had had it on my radar, but I'm embarrassed to say it wasn't on my radar. I had never diagnosed anybody with MS. I had only seen maybe 2 or 3 patients with MS during my career as a family doctor. I had seen some people in medical school and in my training, but not in my outpatient clinic. So it was not on my radar.
Okay, thank you for that. In what ways has your experience as a doctor with MS been different from non-physicians?
Well, I think I've alluded to some of that, just in the sense that I've had some really unique advantages with connections to other doctors.
Yeah.
I mean, when you are a doctor, you know a lot of doctors. My husband's a doctor too. A lot of our friends are. So it's pretty easy to be able to call people and ask for, what do you think is going on? And I was trying to get my husband to tell me what he thought was going on in the days before my diagnosis. And I think that being able to puzzle over that with close friends and family is very helpful. But I really want everyone to get that high level of care. I was leading this clinic for people who didn't have insurance when I was diagnosed, and I was struggling so much to get them to see specialists. I had a patient who waited 2 years to get in to see an ear, nose, and throat specialist. And I was able to call someone on a Sunday afternoon and get in the next day, which is just completely ridiculous and so unfair. So, the contrast of my experience to theirs was really stark and has just brought home the inequities in our healthcare system. And I think that kind of being able to understand that by the contrast of what I was seeing in my clinic versus what I was experiencing, that's been a really key kind of lesson and just the main way that my experience has been different.
I think that you should not go back to medical care, and I think you should instead open up a office with a shingle on it that says, "Help me guide you through your medical care."
Well, it's interesting you say that. I'm in the process right now of getting an extra board certification in what's called lifestyle medicine. Mm-hmm. And lifestyle medicine is about helping people to live their best lives, often by avoiding medications. Certainly, medicines are very important, and I don't ever advocate stopping medicines, especially without talking to a doctor. But lifestyle medicine helps people treat chronic conditions without medicine in a lot of cases. Through diet, exercise, sleep, a lot of the things we've talked about, as well as things like connections with other people. And so I'm getting certified in that, learning a ton about it, and I am going to be joining an MS clinic in Austin this fall, serving as a lifestyle medicine physician, primary care MS specialist, and coach for people with MS.
So thank you for that. Now tell me how that lifestyle physician, how does that correlate to a person that treats as integrative medicine?
Well, there are a lot of doctors that do both. Integrative medicine looks to things beyond just kind of the lifestyle healthy choices and looks at things like herbs, supplements, other modalities, acupuncture, yoga, for example, to treat ailments. And there's certainly can be some overlap with some of what we do in lifestyle medicine.
Okay. Do you use medication? Do you use an MS FDA-approved medication? Okay.
Absolutely. I take Ocrevus. I'm on Ocrevus. I'll just tell you. Yeah.
I was going to tell you not to tell me that.
No, it's okay. I've been on 3 other medicines and had failures, had relapses, and I've been on Ocrevus since 2017.
Awesome. Great for that. All right. So let's go.
Let me just, if you don't mind, I do want to just
maybe I do.
Really state clearly, I feel like it's very important in most cases to be on disease modifying therapies. I know that there is some controversy within the MS community, but there's not really controversy among MS physicians and researchers because the evidence is pretty strong that disease modifying therapies reduce disability and reduce progression of the disease.
That's quite true. Thank you for adding that. Going on to something else, you talk about silver linings. What are some of the silver linings that you've had from having MS, other than getting quality care?
Yeah, thanks. I encourage everybody to look for silver linings. I think we can almost always find them. And I think with MS, it really shifted my perspective. I was very future oriented, and I still am to some extent, but I think MS helped me to learn to focus on the present moment. If we have MS, we have that extra dose of uncertainty, and we don't know what our future is going to hold. So it took me a while, but I learned that MS is not really an excuse to give up my dreams, but to seize them and to do more and do it now if I can. Because again, I don't know what will happen in the future. So I've, really challenged myself with some tough fitness goals. I did a half Ironman triathlon back in April. That was a really exciting opportunity. It was 70 miles in a day of swimming, biking, and running. And I'd always wanted to do that. And then I have really challenged myself again with some writing goals as part of kind of seizing the moment. And then I really have also learned to prioritize what's important. Like, my parents they are often out of town, but when they're in town, we bike ride. We go on a bike ride together every weekend. Overall, I think that MS has just helped me to make sure that I stay well connected with people I care about, and that we take advantage of opportunities that come our way instead of putting things off.
Okay, thank you for that. So you stole my thunder. You're answering my next question for you, and you're already into that. So I'm going to say it anyway because I have to kill some time here, right? So you've done pretty well with your MS, and you're still able to work and be active. Tell us how you've taken care of yourself since your diagnosis. So now you're going to have to come up with some other things other than what you just spoke about.
Okay, so let's see. How have I taken care of myself? I've really been fortunate to have great health care from my doctors and from the newer medication. So that's sticking with my treatment plan has been very helpful. I think it's the most important thing that I've done to stay healthy. But I do exercise first thing every morning. Almost 365 days a year. I eat a very healthy diet, as I mentioned. I really try to just make sure that I spend time outside almost every day. I take my dog for a walk, usually twice a day. Just try to spend that time in nature. We know that's good for our health, our physical health, as well as our mental health. And I've learned that meditation and avoiding caffeine actually help my dizziness, and also help me feel more grounded, especially the meditation. So, it took me a lot of exploration to figure out what would improve my symptoms, but those two things have been really key. And then I've also learned that you just can't, you can do everything right and still get sick. So, a lot of this is still luck, and that plays a big role. I have been lucky.
Thank you for that. How do you balance your work life from your recreation?
I don't do it well a lot of the time. I spend too much time in my office in front of my computer. I did take a break from patient care for several years, where I ended up working for a company that develops programs for people with Medicaid and Medicare to keep people out of the hospital and help them be as healthy as possible. So I have a background in public health and wanted to look at kind of systems. I feel like our health system needs not a lot of improvements, and this was my way of doing that. And that actually helped me balance things a little bit better because I was able to work from home. I was actually able to be home during COVID with my kids who were here and doing online school for more than a year. And I also do really make a point to set a few boundaries. So again, first thing every morning, no matter what, I get up and exercise somehow. I have a lot of different types of exercise that I do. And I have a great support system. I think having that strong support circle of family, friends, my husband's super supportive, and nurturing that support circle has really helped me to stay healthy.
Okay, thank you for that. And when you're outside working out or playing or whatever, how do you adjust with the heat?
Yeah, good question. I've been lucky to not be as affected by heat as a lot of people with MS. Again, luck plays a role in that. I think it's also partly that I grew up in Texas. I have some tolerance for the heat, and I do spend time outside every day, and I can kind of build up a tolerance by doing that as we get closer to summer and then get through the summer. I was out of town for a few weeks in the summer in a cooler climate and came back and did my usual running route around the lake. And I couldn't make it. I had to stop about 5 times during the course of an hour my first day back after that trip because I was not used to the heat. And I still have to stop now a lot more than I used to because of the heat. It's been over 100 degrees nearly every day for the last 2 months here in Austin. It's also very humid. And as you experienced there in Florida, that's a tough combination. I try to dress for cool weather, drink lots of water, stay well hydrated, and try to stay out of the midday sun. I can only get out usually in the morning and at night.
Yep. It's tough when we go out the door and you just hit with moisture,
I
hot,
know.
steamy as hell moisture. It's unbelievable.
It is.
All right. So from the time that you were diagnosed, what would you say your greatest achievements?
Well, I'm super proud of publishing the memoir. That was my
I'm going to get back to
weekend
that in a minute.
project. I know. It was a huge deal for me. I spent years working on it in every spare moment I had. A lot of weekends, especially evenings, went into that. But, and it's gratifying to have it out in the world. But there have been a lot of other things too. So, I think learning to tackle my symptoms and accept my diagnosis and that uncertainty that comes with MS, that I think I've, I may have another relapse any day, but and test that again. But I think I've done a pretty good job of that. And I think my other really major source of pride are my kids. I have two amazing daughters that I worried so much about when I was first diagnosed, and I was dizzy and I was irritable and short with them, and I couldn't play with them the way I wanted to. And yet they have turned out great. They're two caring, smart, fantastic young women who are now 15 and 18 years old, and they're doing great. I'm very proud of them. And I've maintained a supportive marriage. That's been hard. We've worked at it. MS has been good and bad for our marriage. But I think it's something that we have really prioritized and made work well. And then in addition to that, I have a lot of those kind of fitness goals I alluded to, like the triathlon and the MS 150 that I'm proud of.
Sure. My nephew is a triathlon champion. He's gotten awards for it. He's come in first place a few times in his age group, and he's been doing that since I think he was 17, and now he's in his early 20s, and yeah, he loves doing this. So
that's awesome, and I will never ever win any awards for my my fitness, my exercise stuff, because I am very slow.
Know.
I mean, I may be like, if I ever win an award, it would be because I'm like the 90-year-old riding the MS 150. I'm very persistent, but I am not fast. It will never be because of speed.
Okay. Well, whichever, it's endurance also, right? So that's a good thing for yourself. So you talked about your daughters. If you've ever had down times from your illness, have they been around to help out?
They have been. I've had both experiences. I've had experiences where they've been great and helpful, and then I've had experiences where they have been like, not again, you're complaining about being dizzy, stop it. So they are not always perfect, and nor am I. Sometimes I, complain more than I should. We navigate all of that, but no, I think that overall they have learned to be more compassionate themselves because of experiencing this whole condition with me.
Right. Thank you for that. So going further, what advice would you give someone who's facing a new diagnosis of a chronic condition or as multiple sclerosis?
Well, I think every situation is different. It depends on what the condition is. It depends on your support circle. A lot of my patients really didn't have a support circle and didn't have resources, and that can make it tough. And I would encourage them, again, to find at least one person that they can go to. I think for a lot of people, really for anybody, I think a lot of times getting the diagnosis is the worst part, or that process leading up to the diagnosis when you're still not sure what's wrong. That is just so scary. And I think we're programmed to think about the worst case scenario, but in a lot of cases, that worst case scenario is not going to come to fruition, and things aren't usually as bad as we think they're going to be, at least not for me, because I'm usually like catastrophizing and thinking it's going to be the worst thing possible. So I think like once you get the diagnosis, you're going to feel a lot of emotions, and I wouldn't want to predict how everybody's going to feel because everybody's different, but I think that you have to be able to sit with those feelings, not judge yourself, go through grief if that's what you experience. And I felt shock and anger, and I was just furious and sad and worried. And I think all of that's pretty normal. So I was grieving for my former healthy self, but in the end, you have to move on from that. You can't stay there forever. So I have a lot of bits of advice, and I think I'd summarize those by, stay hopeful, know that things are likely to get better. Secondly, make sure you have a doctor that you can trust, who can be your partner through illness. And if you don't have a doctor you can trust, get a new doctor. The National MS Society has a great list of MS specialists around the country, and they can make recommendations for you. I've alluded to a support circle a lot of times, so I think that's my third recommendation. Make sure you've got a support circle, nurture that support circle, help other people, and they'll help you back. And if you can't go public with your diagnosis, at least tell someone who can be there for you and can help you process what's happening and to plan for the future. And then finally, my last bit of advice would be that, you may have to adjust your plans, but you want to figure out what you want to accomplish, and then you want to go for it.
Right. So thank you for that. Thank you very much. I have a few more questions for you, but, you alluded to at the beginning talking about thinking that you had a brain tumor. And I think a lot of us with MS were told at the beginning that we might have a brain tumor. I know I was. Yeah. And, finding out that I had MS, yeah, it was a complete bummer, a complete downer, but I was also glad that I didn't have a brain tumor. So,
right,
it's,
exactly.
Yeah, it slaps you on one side, and then you realize that, it's terrible that you have this, but the good news is that you don't have a death sentence lined up in front of you anymore either. That the butthole doctor that might have told you that, now you want to kill that person for even suggesting that you might have a brain tumor, right? So,
right.
Exactly. All right, let's go back to the memoir, right? There's probably a lot about this memoir you haven't told. There's definitely a lot you haven't told us. Like, what is some of the primary chapters of your book?
Yeah, so I start out the memoir talking about when I was in medical school and I saw a patient with MS, and it was terrifying. I was at a hospital in Houston, and this man came in. He had an intestinal obstruction, and I was on a surgery rotation. And that's why we ended up seeing him, was because he had an obstruction, and we had to decide if we needed to operate. But he was absolutely, totally incapacitated from MS. He had progressive MS clearly for many years. This was also in the mid 90s before there were medications. So he had really, it had taken a toll on his whole body. And I just felt so terrible for him. I remembered him all these years. And that first chapter was my introduction to MS. So of course, when I was diagnosed, I went right back there and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember this guy, and that's how I'm going to be. So yes, I was glad on the one hand I didn't have a brain tumor, but I also recalled that patient. And sorry, I have a dog in my office with me.
We don't care.
Yeah, she's making noise. But I think, that my patient stories, starting with that one individual, are woven throughout the entire book. So I go back and forth between my own experiences with MS. I have a little bit leading up to my diagnosis and then talk about my diagnosis. But then I have all of these patient stories and all of the, they're really, I think, very interesting stories. Many are very sad because, again, I was working with such a vulnerable population. But I think that those stories really brought me a lot of, just taught me a lot and helped me kind of make sense of my whole situation in a different way. So that's a big part of the book, is all these patient stories and what I was dealing with as director of the clinic, which is kind of funny at times. When we had mice in the clinic, we had a crazy audit from what's called the Joint Commission, who was reviewing our clinic to see if we were doing all the right things. We had, lots of fun times, just, my staff and I, as we worked together. And then also we had great parties after work. And I mean, just some other fun. We didn't have a lot of parties after work. We had like a Christmas party, and then we had a going away party when I ultimately left. But it was a great team that I worked with.
Thank you. So we have a question from online, and Erica writes, any opinions on diet and fasting with MS? I've been a PT for 27 years until recently and can no longer tolerate working. I'm primarily sedentary now and trying to prevent significant weight gain. Any suggestions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm really sorry that you're going through that. It sounds really tough. I think that, certainly trying to find some way to be active if you possibly can is going to be important, not just for your physical health, but for your mental health. And I don't know what kind of limits you have, but I would try to avoid being fully sedentary. If you can find some creative occupational therapist or physical therapist that can help you, that would be recommended. But that is not going to solve the weight gain issue. So I think that, again, talking with medical dietitian, preferably somebody that has some lifestyle medicine training would be great. Lifestyle medicine advocates for a largely plant-based diet, which is fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, less meat or avoiding meat completely. I know that seems really radical for a lot of people, but that kind of diet can be very helpful for overall health as well as weight loss. Especially if you're able to cut back on oils as well as animal products.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, last question I have for you is, how does a person obtain your book?
Thank you. So my book is
Wow.
available in all the usual places: Up the Down Escalator, Medicine, Motherhood, and Multiple Sclerosis. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's maybe at your local bookstore. If it's not, ask them to order it. And it's at a lot of libraries. Again, if it's not there, ask them to get it. I also have an audio book available on Audible and some other places that I narrate. So if you, like me, enjoy audiobooks, you can check that out as well.
Do you have a website that people can find?
I do, yeah. So it's www.lisadoggett.com, and Doggett is Doggett. And I have a newsletter as well that I send out usually every one or 2 months with health news updates, MS updates, and it's a lot of fun. A lot of good photos as well that I share. You can sign up on that on my website to get on the newsletter.
Okay, thank you. All right, meanwhile, I do want to say thank you again, Lisa, for being online tonight. We are going to end the show right now, okay? So have a great time. Bye-bye.